because they said we have a short time, want to start with I think two main points that it's critical, important that guys like you that come to visit Israel and understand the current situation in the region. I think that's the two main lessons that you have to take with you home, and that's the as I see the key aspect of our current challenges in the region. I'm sure that there is a lot of other points and issues that we can raise, so I will leave maybe a few minutes also for question and Q&A. But I understand that this is not your first day in Israel, no?
You 3-4 days in.
3-4 days, you visit the borders. I'm sure you heard a bit about the history of the region, the history of State of Israel, the conflict between Israel and our neighbors. And I think, in a nutshell, what you have to understand that at the last 30 years, let's say, maybe 40 years, from the end of the 70s, early 80s, Israel took steps on understanding that we must take risk on this region, try to find a compromise formula with our neighbors. So we withdraw practically from Sinai Desert during the peace agreement with Egypt, withdrew from Lebanon, the security zone in Lebanon, withdrew from 40% of Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, withdrew from 100% of Gaza Strip. Parallel to these steps during the last 40 years, we saw that our main ally in the region during the time, Iran, the extreme religious Shias took the country, the Ayatollahs. We saw what's happened in Turkey, the second ally in the region for Israel. We saw the Erdogan, the direction that he's taking during the last few years. And we saw what's happened in the Arab Springs. We saw what's happened here. That bottom line, I can say that most people that surround us, if you take this point, 5,000 kilometers surround us, we see more and more people adopt ideas from the 11th century and practice and know how to use weapons of the 21st century. And this gap is the name of the game of this region. So two main challenges that we face now, and that's what, as I said, you have to take it with you. First of all, what we see in the Middle East is the collapse of the arrangement that established the region post First World War. The First World War, during the First World War, we saw what we call Sykes-Picot borders, Sykes-Picot arrangements, and practically that arrangement that create state in this region is collapsing. It's took 100 years. It's quite nice and well. We saw in the Soviet Union that arrangement took less time. But practically, when we see there is four, let's say, nations here in the Middle East, in the region, there are the Iranian, there are the Turks, there are the Egyptians, there are the Israelis. All the others are kind of coalitions, families, tribes, arrangements that create during the post First World War, and now we see all this region is shaking. And the main challenge is to understand that borders in the Middle East that exist during the last 100 years will not be the same borders in the next 100 years. And I know that I'm saying something big, something maybe some of people think ridiculous, but I think this is our main challenge of rethinking about that, because what we see mainly in Europe, that they are believe or try to achieve the stabilized situation that was till 2011, 2012. When it started what we call the Arab Spring, and we pay for this we pay a lot. We see hundreds of thousands of people killed in this region because of the idea fix of holy borders, the previous borders, and we see a spin-off of this concept that millions of refugees has to leave this region. And some of them try to find new life in Europe, and this has a huge influence on the European politics. So things that happens here in this region, because of the idea fix of keeping the borders as it was, that not reflect the ethnic borders, but also, I can say in some areas, artificial borders, create huge challenge on the free world. And I think the first step of new thinking, of new understanding, of deep understanding that we need to rethink about the borders on these regions happens when President of the United States recognized the Golan Heights as a part of Israel. This is an important step to Israel, but this is a huge step to the region and a huge step for the free world, because this is first time that the superpower of the world, United States, understand that to create stability on the region, we have to rethink about the borders. The Golan Heights is 1% of what we called, or used to call, Syria. It's not really Syrian country. People kill each other there. You know, there is 600, 700,000 people who died in the last 7-8 years. 2/3 of them lost their homes. This is not a Syrian people. This is artificial idea. This is only on the maps. But there is a Shias there. There is Sunnis there. There is few people that not really. And this is a great example how we thought things was post First World War, and how we have to think about the future post the Arab Spring. So borders is the name of the game. Borders will be the challenge on this region. We see what's happening in Libya now. Tell me, you can tell me What do you think? There is a Libyan people? There's one state, one people, one nation that's called Libya? I wonder. I don't think so. That was a state in the 20th century. But what we see in the second quarter of the 21st century, things will change. And we have to think about what has to be the next stabilize or balance points in this region. Second key aspect, more familiar, I believe that you heard about that what we see here in the Middle East, first time, a changing of the idea what is war. We used to thought that war is that army fight against army. We saw here, as I said, a lot of peoples in the region adopt ideas from the 11th century and as an access to weapons of the 21st century, and that's create a new situation that we see that war is focused and mainly focused on civilian population. We see Israel facing in a challenge in the south, in Gaza Strip, after we withdraw from Gaza, in the north, in Lebanon. In Gaza Strip, we have around, I'm assuming or estimating as 20,000 rockets around. In the north, we have 200,000 rockets and missiles that focused on Israel. Last night, or the day before yesterday, first time Syrian army shot missiles to the Golan Heights. That means that we face a situation that kind of mixed between army and civilian people. In the morning they are working in agriculture, in the evening they are soldiers. They use weapons, missiles and rockets, that most of them located inside urban areas, and they shooting missiles and rockets to the free world urban areas. This is total new way of thinking about fight. And we are not talking about few missiles, because when you see the weapons that those people, Hezbollah in the north, that they have in Lebanon, for example, 200,000 rockets and missiles. That weapons is the closest conventional weapons that can create an effect that is the closest or similar and somehow to a non-conventional weapons. Because all of these weapons is focused or mainly focused to a civilian areas. So this is our second or next challenge or second point. And as I said, we have a lot of other aspects that is unique to this region, that start in this region, and mainly in the next decades or after, you can see it more and more in other areas in the world, or in the Middle East. This bad direction will stop. And we must change this when the threat is small, we can manage it. Before, we have to pay a huge price for that. So sorry for make some depressed aspect to our short conversation. I'm sure you will find a lot of time to talk about Startup Nation and the great things that happens here, but because you're coming from military background and I'm sure you will stay on in those directions. So I try to introduce some of the, as I say, key points that I personally, privately think that this is our current challenges. So please, if you have any questions or.
Sir, you mentioned that the U.S. recognizing the Golan Heights. You mentioned that the U.S. recognizing the Golan Heights was a huge step for Israel in the right direction. I was curious, in your opinion, are there any other borders, in your perspective, that the superpowers like the U.S. should recognize in order to continue to push Israel in the right direction?
Okay, I understand that you ask that U.S. recognize changing borders or Israeli sovereignty on the Golan Heights, and if I think that the U.S. has to recognize other areas. Tell you, our main challenge is our eastern borders. Our border with what we call Judea, Samaria, West Bank, depends, every quotation is also as a political, as every topic has a political point. But I think when we are talking about the West Bank, yes, also you have to understand the current situation there. The West Bank, I want to split the region to 3 areas, if I can say. 40% of the area, Israel withdrew from around 40% of the area through the agreements, the Oslo agreements with the Palestinians and the steps on this agreement. On those 40%, around 95% of the Palestinian population are lived on that. We also withdraw from 100% of Gaza. This is very complicated situation because Gaza, we have a concentration of Palestinian people, but when you look on the map or physically, there is no direct link between Gaza and West Bank. There are 2 separate territories. Back to the West Bank, to the Judea, Samaria. When I say 40% is under Palestinian control, 60% today is under Israeli control. The 60%, if you want to split it, around 15% of the area is occupied by Israeli settlements. Things are changing on the ground in the last 50 years. The Israeli population on this area, it depends if you quote the Israeli people who lived in Jerusalem by own the Green Line, what we call. We have around 250,000 Israelis in Jerusalem, and what we call East Jerusalem, around 450 Israelis in the West Bank. That, when we look on the maps, it's 15. I take 15 as a, also area that they can develop. Another 45%, as I said, 40 is Palestinian, 15 is Israeli settlement, and 45 is security zones, is military security zones. When we see what's happened after Israel withdrew from Gaza, that Gaza became an Iranian base to shoot missiles or rockets on Israeli population. What we cannot say can afford in the south, for sure we cannot afford on the West Bank. Because when you took Judea, Samaria, West Bank, and you look on the maps, the gap between the Mediterranean Sea and the border in some areas is around 15, 20 kilometers. How much is in miles? 9 miles. So you cannot and 75% of our population is surrounding those areas. So bottom line, I can tell you that I cannot see in the 21st century a compromise between people that will include evacuation of towns, villages, settlements. And this is the third issue that we have to understand. Israel withdrew from Sinai desert and evacuated the population during the early 80s, end of the end of the 70s. There were 3,000 peoples there. Then Israel withdrew from Gaza Strip and evacuated the Israeli population there, Israeli settlements. There were 7,000 people. We cannot take this idea that maybe work on 3,000 people and 7,000 people and adapt it and implement it on hundreds of thousands of people. That's the expectation of the Palestinian, and I cannot see that this idea can work. So when you ask me about changing borders and reflect the facts on the grounds and what we call the ethnic borders vis-a-vis the geographical borders or vis-a-vis the political borders, it has to be reflected. Then I think that when we are talking about future arrangement on the settlement aspect, I cannot see in a situation of evacuation of people. Then we have a discussion about security arrangement. When we see what's happened in the Middle East, when we see what's happened, and I said it and I said to say it, what's happened on the Palestinian areas, when we see the ideas and when we saw what's happened in Gaza Strip when Israel withdrew, so we have, as I said, a big challenge about the borders and where have to be the border in our east border between Israel and Palestinian. And for sure, as I said, that U.S., I believe, has to recognize that also in this area, things change, and there is effects on the grounds that we have to deal with. Sorry to. Okay.
So sort of going off that, with certain left and right boundaries to what Israel can compromise, what can Israel do to achieve some semblance of peace with the Palestinian population?
I think we have to. Yes, what maybe you will repeat and I will repeat the.
Oh, okay. So, what if resettlement is completely out of the question? What steps could Israel theoretically take, if any, to achieve peace with the Palestinians, if that's possible?
What the steps that Israel has to achieve to reach peace with the Palestinians? First of all, we have to do all what we can to find or to understand if there can be a peace here or not. We have no I would say we cannot afford to lose opportunities from the Israeli point of view. But we have to understand or as I say, we have to understand that our risk management formula in 2019 is a different risk management formula that we had in 2009 because things change in the region. So first of all, we have to see if there is what we can help and what the world can help to stabilize the economic situation at the Palestinian areas in the West Bank, the PA, and in Gaza. I think that we need to recover or rebuild Gaza, but as a condition, as a precondition to rebuild Gaza, we must demilitarize Gaza from rockets and missiles. That must be a strategic condition, Israeli condition, but I think also free world condition, as we here's my friend, will change. As we ask, about demilitarize Syria from chemical weapons during the war, the same idea has to be demilitarize Gaza from missiles and rockets as a precondition and condition to rebuild and help Palestinian economic. Then we have to see if we can find a new balance point between us and the Palestinians. I believe personally that also has to be involved the Jordanian in this arrangement, and we have to try to influence or convince the Palestinian that both sides must compromise. It means not only Israel has to compromise, but also the Palestinian has to compromise. And the main compromise that the Palestinians never adopt, and this is the key issue, and that's I think is the name of the game. Palestinian, and I said that I'm sad to say that, never recognize idea of two state for two nation. They recognize the idea, the pragmatic part of the Palestinian, they recognize the idea of two states. What I mean? A Palestinian nation state beside two nation state in Israel, because they not recognize till today. We are dealing with them more than 25 years from Oslo Agreement, but they never agree to compromise for two nation state, live side by side in a peaceful way. They said Palestine has to be a nation state, the homeland of the Palestinian, but Israel has to be a state that split the collective rights, the national right between Jews that live there and Arabs, Palestinians that live there. And this is a non-starting idea. So finalize or finish, when we were here in 48, we established our Jewish state after 2,000 years of situations that we were a nation, a community without sovereignty. We were here only 600,000 people. Today we are 9 million, and even there is a lot of challenges. Bobo,
The time is over.
The time is over. I think our situation much better than it was 70 years ago. So thank you very much to listen to me, and hope to see you again somehow.
Thank you very much. Thank you.